invitation arrived on a Tuesday, forwarded through 3 different email addresses before it finally reached me in Kosovo, where I was finishing a 2-week assessment of NATO infrastructure coordination. Pink, glittery, with a cartoon dinosaur wearing a party hat. "You're invited to Tyler's 8th birthday bash!" It screamed in Comic Sans, followed by my sister Kaylee's perfectly curated details: catered lunch, bounce house, upscale casual dress code. I stared at it on my phone screen, 13 hours ahead of Boston time, and felt the familiar weight of obligations settle over my shoulders like a rucksack. I hadn't been home in 11 months, not because I was avoiding them, though that would have been easier to explain. No, I'd been in South Korea for 4 months, then Germany for 3, then a 6-week rotation through various undisclosed locations that my family only knew as traveling for work. The kind of travel that meant I couldn't tell them where I was going, when I'd be back, or what I was doing when I got there. The kind of travel that, to them, meant I was probably delivering mail on a military base somewhere. I should explain something about my family. My sister Kaylee, 3 years younger than me, infinitely more successful by every metric that mattered in our mother's world, had married a hedge fund manager named Gregory. They lived in Wellesley in a house with actual columns. White ones. Her children, Tyler and Madison, attended the Brookside Academy, where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary and where legacy admissions were discussed, with the reverence usually reserved for religious doctrine. Kaylee had constructed a life of deliberate, visible success, the kind you could photograph and post on social media, the kind that looked good at charity galas and parent-teacher conferences, the kind that made our mother, Constance Underhill, beam with maternal pride at her bridge club. And then there was me, Miranda Underhill, 43 years old, unmarried, no children, no house with columns, no Instagram-worthy life. Just a career they couldn't see and therefore couldn't value. I'd graduated from public school, Millbrook High, class of 1997, in a town where college prep meant making sure you filled out your state school applications on time. My guidance counselor had suggested community college. My mother had suggested maybe I wasn't college material and should consider practical options like dental hygiene or court reporting. I'd applied to West Point instead. Got in, graduated. Spent the next 21 years serving in ways that ranged from visible to classified, from combat zones to Pentagon briefing rooms, from platoon leader to battalion commander to my current assignment, which I couldn't discuss at family dinners because it was, quite literally, none of their business. But they didn't know any of that. They knew I was in the Army, they knew I traveled a lot. They knew I lived in a modest apartment in Alexandria, Virginia, drove a 10-year-old Honda, and never talked about career advancement or salary or any of the normal metrics by which they measured human worth. They'd concluded, with the serene certainty of people who'd never questioned their assumptions, that I'd failed. Not dramatically, not in a way that required intervention or charity, just quietly, perpetually. In the way that people fail when they make bad choices early and spend the rest of their lives treading water in the shallow end of achievement. Kaylee had never said this explicitly, she didn't have to. It was in the way she introduced me at family gatherings. "This is my sister, she's in the military." The slight pause before military, as if she were saying unemployed or between opportunities. It was in the questions she asked, layered with concern. "Are you doing okay financially? Do you have health insurance through that? Have you thought about what you'll do after?" It was in the gifts she gave me, practical things, slightly condescending things. A gift card to Target, a nice blazer for interviews, a self-help book about finding your purpose in your 40s. And it was in the way she'd stopped inviting me to certain events, the ones where her successful friends would be present, the ones where she'd have to explain me. Tyler's 8th birthday party apparently hadn't made that cut. I RSVP'd yes, booked a flight from Pristina to Boston with 3 connections, arrived at Logan at 6:30 a.m. on Saturday, drove straight to my storage unit in Somerville to retrieve the civilian clothes I kept there, and showed up at Kaylee's house in Wellesley at exactly 1 p.m. as specified. The house looked like a spread from Architectural Digest. Perfectly landscaped lawn, professionally decorated interior, everything white and gray and carefully curated. The bounce house in the backyard was shaped like a castle, because of course it was. I rang the doorbell. Kaylee answered, and I watched her face cycle through surprise that I'd actually come, assessment of what I was wearing, and resigned acceptance that she'd have to deal with me. "Miranda, you made it!" She hugged me briefly, the kind of hug that doesn't actually involve touching. Where were you again?" "Europe," I said vaguely. "Right, work stuff." "Work stuff," I confirmed. She ushered me inside, through the foyer with its chandelier and fresh flowers, to the kitchen where she was orchestrating the party with military precision. Ironic, that. She'd probably have been good at my job. "Most of the parents are already here," she said, arranging fruit skewers on a platter. "I should warn you, they're all Brookside families. Very accomplished. Don't feel like you have to. I mean, if you're more comfortable just hanging out with the kids, that's totally fine." Translation: "Please don't embarrass me in front of my friends." "I'll manage," I said. She gave me a look that suggested she doubted this but was too polite to say so. The backyard was a tableau of upper-middle-class suburban perfection. White tents. Catering tables laden with food that looked like art. Children in expensive casual wear screaming with joy in the bounce house. Adults in upscale casual attire, which apparently meant designer jeans and statement jewelry, standing in clusters, holding wine glasses, discussing the things that people in Wellesley discuss. Private schools, property values, vacation homes, the best SAT tutors for children who were still in elementary school. I took a glass of sparkling water from the bar station. Yes, there was a bar station at a child's birthday party, and stationed myself near the edge of the gathering, where I could observe without having to participate. It's a skill you develop in my line of work, the ability to be present but unobtrusive, to see everything while being seen as little as possible. I watched Tyler and his friends, 8-year-olds, with that particular confidence that comes from knowing they're destined for success because everyone has always told them so. I watched Madison, 6 years old, trying to keep up with the older kids. I watched Gregory working the crowd like a politician, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, being the kind of father whose success rubs off on his children. And I watched Kaylee, my baby sister, glowing with the satisfaction of a party perfectly executed, a life perfectly curated. A woman approached her, blonde, expensive highlights, wearing what I estimated to be a $3,000 watch. "Kaylee, this is absolutely lovely," the woman gushed. "You always throw the most beautiful parties." "Thank you, Jennifer. I just want Tyler to feel special." "Well, he certainly is. Brookside is lucky to have him." Jennifer sipped her wine. "Is Madison starting there next year?" "She's on the wait list for kindergarten." "We're hopeful." "Oh, you'll get in. Legacy families always do. That's why it's so important to start them young, build the network early." Another woman joined them, dark hair, pearls that were definitely real. "Are you talking about Brookside?" she asked. "My daughter just got accepted for next year. The interview process was intense." "Isn't it?" Jennifer agreed. "But it's worth it. The education, the connections, it sets them up for life." "Absolutely," Kaylee said. "I mean, look at the college placement rates. 85% Ivy League or equivalent." "Where did you go, Kaylee?" the dark-haired woman asked. "Wellesley, right?" "Yes," Kaylee said, with the quiet pride of someone who knew this was the right answer. "And your husband?" "Gregory went to Princeton." "Perfect pedigree," Jennifer said approvingly. They were standing maybe 15 feet from me, close enough that I could hear every word, close enough that I could see Kaylee glowing under their approval. And then Jennifer's eyes drifted toward me. "Is that your sister?" she asked, voice lowering slightly. Kaylee followed her gaze. I saw her face shift, that micro-expression of someone who'd been caught off guard and was now calculating how to handle it. "Yes," she said carefully, "that's Miranda." "I didn't know you had a sister." The way she said it suggested that Kaylee had deliberately failed to mention me, which was probably true. We're very different," Kaylee's voice had taken on that particular tone, apologetic, slightly embarrassed. She's visiting. Oh, how nice. What does she do? I watched Kaylee's face, watched her decide how to answer, watched her choose the path of least resistance. She's in the army. She travels a lot for work. How interesting, Jennifer said in the tone of someone who found it the opposite of interesting. Did she go to college? And here it was, the moment I'd been watching approach like a storm on the horizon. Kaylee hesitated, just for a second. But that second told me everything. She went to public school, she said, and I heard the emphasis on public. Turned out fine for her level. Her level. The words hung in the air like smoke. Jennifer nodded knowingly. Well, everyone has different paths, don't they? Not everyone is cut out for the academic track. Exactly, Kaylee said, and I heard the relief in her voice. Relief that Jennifer understood, that she didn't have to explain further. That my failure could be acknowledged and then politely ignored. The dark-haired woman chimed in. My brother went to state school. He's doing fine. Sells insurance now. See, Kaylee said, there are lots of good options. College isn't everything. Although it certainly helps, Jennifer added. Oh, absolutely. I'm so grateful, Gregory, and I can give our children that foundation. The right schools, the right environment. It makes such a difference. They'd moved on, satisfied with their assessment of me. I was a cautionary tale, briefly noted and then dismissed. The sister who'd taken the wrong path but was, at least, making do at her level. I took a sip of my sparkling water, counted to 10. Reminded myself that I was 43 years old, had commanded soldiers in combat, had briefed generals and politicians, had made decisions that affected national security, and could handle my sister's casual dismissal of my entire existence. I could handle it because I'd been handling it for 21 years. Since the day I'd told them I'd gotten into West Point and my mother had said, "Are you sure that's a good idea? It's so rigid." Since the day I'd graduated and my father had said, well, at least you'll have job security, government work is stable. Since the day I'd been promoted to captain and Kaylee had said, that's nice, Gregory just made partner. Since the day I'd deployed to Afghanistan and my mother had said, can't you get assigned somewhere safer, somewhere normal? They'd spent 2 decades constructing a narrative about my life, and that narrative had no room for success as I'd defined it. Service, leadership, sacrifice, purpose. None of those things showed up on a resume they could understand or a business card they could show their friends. So I'd let them believe what they needed to believe. Because explaining would have required revealing classified information. Because arguing would have required defending choices I'd never regretted. Because proving myself to people who'd already decided I wasn't worth their respect felt like a waste of energy I needed for actual important things. And because, honestly, a part of me had stopped caring. I'd found the thing I was meant to do. I was good at it. I mattered in the places where I worked, to the people I served. The fact that my family couldn't see that wasn't my problem to solve. Or so I'd told myself. But standing there, listening to my sister tell her friends I'd turned out fine for my level, I felt something crack. Not dramatically. Not in a way that required immediate action. Just a small fissure in the careful composure I'd maintained for 2 decades. The party continued around me. Children played, adults networked. The sun shone on Kaylee's perfect lawn. I found Tyler eventually, away from the bounce house, sitting under a tree with a book. Hey buddy, I said, sitting down next to him, having fun? He shrugged. It's okay, I like the presents part. What are you reading? He showed me. A book about military history, specifically the American Revolution. It's for school. We have to do a project on historical leaders. Cool topic. I guess. He flipped through the pages. Mom says I should pick someone from business history instead, like John Rockefeller. She says it's more relevant to my future. I smiled despite myself. You could do both. Maybe. He kept flipping, stopped at a page about West Point. Did you know they still have the military academy there, where they trained leaders for the revolution? I did know that. It's really hard to get into. Only like 10% of people who apply. Something like that. He studied the page, then looked at me with the sudden focus of an 8-year-old who just had a thought. "Aunt Miranda, where did you go to school?" The question was innocent. Genuine curiosity from a kid who'd just been reading about military history and who was sitting next to his aunt who happened to be in the military. But the timing was devastating. Because at that exact moment, Kaylee had walked over with Jennifer and the dark-haired woman carrying a fresh round of wine glasses, mid-conversation about something involving college admission statistics. And Tyler, in the way that children do, hadn't lowered his voice when he asked his question. So everyone heard him. "Aunt Miranda, where did you go to school?" I opened my mouth to answer, vaguely, deflectively, in the way I'd answered questions like this for 21 years. But Tyler, bless him, was already answering his own question. His eyes had gone wide. He was staring at the page in his book, then at me, then back at the page. "Wait," he said, voice rising with excitement. Wait. He scrambled to his knees, holding the book up, pointing at a photograph. Mom! Aunt Miranda is here. It says she went to West Point." The universe stopped. That's the only way to describe it. Every conversation ceased. Every adult within hearing distance, which was most of them because Tyler had shouted, turned to look. At Tyler, at his book, at me. Kaylee's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, realization, denial, horror. Her smile, that perfect hostess smile she'd been wearing all afternoon, cracked down the middle. "What?" she said faintly. Tyler was still holding up the book, animated now, talking at the speed that excited children talk. Look at this picture. They have all these photos of people who went to West Point, and Aunt Miranda is here. Colonel Miranda Underhill, U.S. Army, West Point class of 2001. That's you, right? That's your name?" He thrust the book toward his mother. Kaylee took it with shaking hands. I watched her read the caption, watched her see my name, my rank. The photograph, me in dress uniform, taken 2 years ago at a ceremony I'd attended but never mentioned to my family. Jennifer leaned over her shoulder. "Let me see that." The book made its way through the group, parents crowding around, reading, checking the name against me, doing the math that I could see happening behind their eyes. West Point, class of 2001, which meant I'd graduated 23 years ago, which meant I'd been in the Army for more than 2 decades, which meant... "Colonel?" Jennifer said finally, looking at me with an expression of complete bewilderment. "You're a colonel?" I stood up, brushed grass off my jeans, and met her eyes. "Yes," I said simply. The silence that followed was profound. Kaylee was staring at me like I'd just materialized from another dimension. "You never said. You never told us." "You never asked," I said quietly. "But..." She looked at the book, at me, at her friends, at the wreckage of the narrative she'd built. "West Point? You went to West Point?" "Yes." "But you said, I thought, you went to Millbrook High." "I did, for high school. Then I went to West Point for college." "Why didn't you tell us?" It was a fair question, asked too late, but fair. "I did tell you," I said, "when I got my acceptance letter. You were 15. You told me it sounded boring." I watched her remember, saw it flicker across her face, the memory of her teenage self, dismissing her older sister's accomplishment because it didn't fit her idea of what college should be. "I didn't know what it meant," she whispered. "No," I agreed, "you didn't." Jennifer had recovered enough to ask the obvious question: "How long have you been in the Army?" 23 years, quote. "And you're a colonel?" The dark-haired woman's voice held something between respect and accusation, as if I'd deliberately deceived them. "Yes." "What do you do?" This from another parent, a man in expensive golf attire. "I'm currently assigned to NATO Allied Land Command," I said. "Before that, I commanded a battalion at Fort Campbell. Before that, various staff and command positions." The words meant nothing to most of them, but the tone did, the confidence, the precision, the implication of responsibility and authority. Kaylee was still holding the book. "Why didn't you say anything? All these years, why didn't you tell us?" It was the question I'd known would come eventually, if this moment ever arrived. I looked at my sister, at the life she'd built, the image she'd curated, the world she'd constructed where success looked like property values and prep schools and wine at children's birthday parties. "Because you'd already decided what my life looked like," I said, "and I had more important things to do than argue with you about it." The words came out more gently than I'd intended. Not cruel, just honest. Kaylee's face crumpled. Not dramatically, not with tears or denials. Just a slow collapse of the certainty she'd carried, the assumptions she'd built her judgment on. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't. I should have." "Yes," I said, "you should have." Jennifer had backed away slightly, wineglass forgotten, clearly reassessing every conversation she'd had in the last hour. The dark-haired woman was staring at the book as if it might reveal more secrets. The other parents were exchanging glances that said, "We weren't told about this. We weren't prepared." Tyler, oblivious to the emotional carnage he'd caused, was beaming. "This is so cool! Can you tell me about West Point? Do you know about the Revolutionary War? Did you ever meet any generals?" I looked down at my nephew, this 8-year-old who'd accidentally detonated 21 years of careful silence. "I've met a few," I said. "That's awesome!" He grabbed my hand. "Can you tell me stories? Mom never tells me good stories." Kaylee made a sound, half laugh, half sob. "I can tell you some stories," I told Tyler, "but first, I think your mom needs a minute." I looked at Kaylee, really looked at her. At the sister I'd watched grow up, who'd chosen a different path, who'd built a different life, who'd decided somewhere along the way that her path was the only valid one. "I'm going to take Tyler inside and tell him about West Point," I said. "You should probably explain things to your friends." I didn't wait for her response. I took Tyler's hand and walked toward the house, leaving behind the party, the perfect lawn, the shattered assumptions. Behind me, I heard voices rising. Questions. Exclamations. The sound of a carefully constructed social hierarchy reorganizing itself around new information. And I heard my sister, voice breaking, trying to explain the unexplainable. How she'd had a colonel in the family for years and never knew. How she'd dismissed her sister's entire career as failure. How she'd been so certain, so sure, so wrong. Tyler chattered beside me as we walked, asking questions about training and leadership and history, innocent of the earthquake his discovery had caused. I answered his questions, told him about the academy, about service, about the choice I'd made 23 years ago to pursue something that mattered more than comfort or wealth or social status. And through the window I could see the party continuing, transformed now. The bounce house still standing, the catering tables still laden with expensive food, the children still playing. But the parents were clustered around Kaylee, and her face was the face of someone whose world had shifted on its axis. The face of someone realizing that the story she'd been telling, about her sister, about success, about what mattered, had been fiction all along. And that the truth was standing in her kitchen, drinking water, explaining to her 8-year-old son what it meant to serve something bigger than yourself. I stayed for another hour, long enough to cut the cake, long enough to watch Tyler open his presents, expensive toys that he would appreciate appropriately and then forget, long enough to endure the suddenly respectful questions from parents who now wanted to know about my career, my travels, my fascinating life. Quote, long enough to see Kaylee's face every time someone asked her, "You really didn't know?" and watch her try to explain the inexplicable. When I left, she walked me to the door. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Miranda, I'm so sorry." "I know. I should have asked, really asked, about your life, your work." "Yes. Could we start over? Could I learn about what you actually do?" I looked at her, at the little sister I'd protected once, who'd somehow decided I was the one who needed protecting. "Most of what I do is classified," I said. "I can't talk about it." Which is why I didn't. "But you could have told us about West Point, about your rank." "Could I have?" I asked. "Would you have believed me? Or would you have assumed I was lying, exaggerating, trying to compete with your success?" She opened her mouth, closed it, because we both knew the answer. It doesn't matter now, I said. Tyler knows. Eventually everyone will know. You'll have to figure out how to explain it to Mom and Dad. Oh God, she said. Mom and Dad. Yeah. She laughed, a broken sound. They're gonna lose their minds. Probably. I really am sorry for what I said. About your level. I nodded. I know you are. Can you forgive me? I thought about it. About 21 years of casual dismissal, of assumptions and condescension, of being made to feel small by people who should have known better. Eventually, I said, but not today. She nodded, accepted it. I walked to my rental car, drove back to Logan, caught my flight to Washington. By the time I landed, my phone had 14 messages. From my mother, my father, my aunt, my cousin, all asking the same question. Is it true? Is what Kaylee told us true? I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went home to my modest apartment in Alexandria, changed into running gear, and did 6 miles along the Potomac. Somewhere around mile 4, I started laughing. Not bitterly, not triumphantly, just laughing at the absurdity of it all. At the fact that a children's book, had accomplished what 21 years of service couldn't, made my family see me. By the time I got home, showered, and checked my phone again, there were 8 more messages. I read them, all of them. The apologies, the shock, the demands for explanation. And then I composed a single response, sent it to all of them. I'm exactly who I've always been. You just weren't paying attention. I put my phone on silent, poured myself a bourbon, and sat on my balcony watching the sun set over the city. Tomorrow, I'd go back to work. To briefings and assessments and the business of keeping people safe from threats they'd never know about. But tonight I was just Miranda Underhill, West Point class of 2001 U.S. Army colonel, sitting in peace with the knowledge that I'd never needed their validation to know my worth. I just needed them to stop pretending I didn't have any. And thanks to an 8-year-old with a history book,